The days that followed carried a heavy silence. Wherever Claire walked, eyes followed her. The same villagers she had once healed now stepped aside as though her shadow was dangerous. They accepted her cures with trembling hands, but their gratitude was laced with fear. It was as if every remedy she offered came at an unseen cost, a debt they could never repay. The priest's voice grew louder in his sermons. He spoke of false miracles, of women who used unnatural powers to deceive the innocent. He never spoke her name, but every word was an arrow aimed at Claire. In the market, whispers turned into stares. At night, Jamie could hear voices outside their door, low, angry voices that faded when he stepped out but never truly left. The air had shifted. The suspicion was no longer hidden. It was now a storm gathering strength. Even within her circle of allies, cracks began to show. Friends who once defended her now avoided her eyes. Questions hung in the air, unspoken but sharp. Why did she know so much? Why did she never speak of where her skills came from? Some who once called her healer now called her dangerous. And Claire, though she carried herself with calm, felt the walls closing in. The true blow came when someone close betrayed her trust. A family she had saved, people who owed her their lives, spoke of her to the priest. They said no ordinary woman could have done what she did. Their fear outweighed their gratitude. And with that, Claire's name became a subject of open debate. The line between healer and witch blurred until no one could say where it ended. Jamie stood firm at her side, his loyalty unshaken. But even he felt the danger. He knew too well what crowds could do when fear turned into rage. He had seen innocent women dragged before councils, judged not by truth but by rumor, and condemned by the very people they had served. Now he feared that Claire's kindness had painted a target on her back. The whispers had become threats, and the threats would soon become action. Claire's choice to save lives had carried a price. And now that price was coming due. It began with a single shout. One word hurled across the square, sharp enough to slice the quiet in two. Witch. Claire froze where she stood, the marketplace falling into a heavy silence. All eyes turned to her. A woman she had once healed stepped back as if her very presence carried poison. Then another voice rose louder, this time echoing the same word. And suddenly, the whisper that had followed her for weeks had become a roar. The priest stepped forward, his hand raised to calm the crowd, but his words fanned the flames instead of cooling them. He spoke of dangers hiding in plain sight, of demons wearing the face of healers, of miracles that came not from God but from the devil. Every sentence pulled the crowd tighter against Claire, every glance sharper than a blade. She could feel the weight of their fear pressing against her, threatening to crush her beneath it. Jamie moved to her side, his body a shield, his voice booming as he dared anyone to touch her. But even he could not silence the tide of suspicion. The people wanted answers, and they wanted them now. How did she know what no one else did? How did she save lives when all others failed? Their questions were no longer whispers of curiosity. They were demands for confession. Someone stepped forward with an accusation. A man whose brother she had healed claimed that Claire had used unnatural knowledge to steal death's power. He insisted no mortal woman could have done it. Others quickly added their voices. Stories twisted by fear, each one painting Claire not as a savior but as a danger. The marketplace had turned into a trial, and Claire stood at its center. Her heart pounded as she looked at the faces around her. Gratitude had turned to anger, admiration to suspicion, and kindness to betrayal. The world she had carefully balanced on secrecy was crumbling beneath her feet. Every act of healing, every moment of compassion had built this moment, the moment when her knowledge would no longer protect her, but condemn her. The crowd surged, the voices rising into chaos. For the first time, Claire understood that her gift had pushed her to the edge of survival. And one more misstep, one more word too bold would tip her into a fall she could never escape. The storm had broken, and there would be no turning it back. The shouts rose like thunder, each voice demanding a verdict. Claire stood in the center, her heart pounding, her mind racing. She had walked battlefields in another time, faced death in war, yet this fury in the eyes of frightened villagers, felt more dangerous than any musket or sword. Because here, it wasn't just her life on the line. It was Jamie's too. Jamie's hand gripped hers, strong, steady, but she could feel the tension in his body. He was ready to fight for her, ready to spill blood if the crowd came closer. But Claire knew the truth. One blade against many could only delay the inevitable. Violence would not save them. And silence now might doom them faster. She thought of the knowledge she carried, the truths that lived in her memory. She could save them with words, with warnings of futures no one else could see. But to speak would be to expose herself completely, to admit that she did not belong to this world at all. Would they believe her? Or would that confession be the noose tightening around her neck? The priest's voice cut through the storm, sharp and commanding. He demanded she answer. Who was she truly? And where did her unnatural wisdom come from? The crowd fell into silence, waiting, eyes burning with suspicion, fear, and something worse, anticipation. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She stood at the edge of an impossible choice. To reveal the truth could mean her end. To stay silent could condemn her as guilty without trial. Around her, the crowd leaned closer, their judgment heavy in the air. And in that moment, as the world seemed to hold its breath, Claire whispered a single word so soft, so fragile. It was almost lost in the wind. The crowd gasped. Jamie's grip tightened. The fate of everything she loved now hung on what came next. The fire of suspicion had become a trial, and the trial had only just begun. Sometimes knowing too much can be as dangerous as knowing nothing at all. In the world of Outlander, Claire Randall carries a secret that no one else around her could ever imagine. She walks through a time not her own, carrying knowledge that could change lives or destroy them. To some, she seems like a miracle sent from heaven, a healer with answers beyond her age. But to others, she looks like something far more dangerous. In an age of fear, superstition, and suspicion, knowledge can become a weapon. And Claire is about to learn that having the truth in her hands is both a blessing and a curse. Section 1. Claire's unique knowledge. Claire was not like the people she lived among. To them, herbs and simple remedies were the only medicine they knew. Illness was explained by curses, spirits, or sins. But Claire, she had come from a different world, a different time. She had seen hospitals, surgeons, and medicines that were centuries ahead of what anyone around her could imagine. So when she touched a fevered brow, when she set a broken bone, when she saved a life that should have been lost, whispers followed her. People looked at her with wide eyes, unsure whether to call her an angel or something darker. Her knowledge gave her power, but also isolation. Every time she spoke with certainty about an illness, people wondered how she could know. Every time she prepared a treatment no one else had ever seen, people wondered if it came from nature or from something unnatural. Even those close to her began to question her at times. Jamie trusted her heart, but even he could not ignore how others whispered behind her back. And Claire knew that the more she revealed, the greater the danger she placed on both of them. Still, she could not stop herself. When she saw a child coughing, she knew the disease. When she saw a wound festering, she knew how to clean it. Her hands and her mind worked with certainty, guided by lessons no one else could understand. And yet each time she saved a life, she felt the walls around her closing in. In the 18th century, women who knew too much were not celebrated, they were feared. And in a land where whispers of witchcraft could end a life, Claire's secret knowledge burned like a flame in the dark. For Claire, silence was not an option. She could never turn away from suffering. But every time she chose to help, she risked exposing herself. Each cure she gave, each warning she shared was another thread pulled from the fabric of secrecy. And soon she would learn that even the smallest act of kindness could awaken suspicions she might never escape. At first, people only whispered when Claire's back was turned. They watched her heal wounds faster than any village healer could, and they called it luck. They saw her mix herbs in ways no one had ever seen before, and they called it clever. But as the days passed, luck seemed too small a word for what Claire could do. She knew things no woman should know. She predicted fevers before they struck, and she spoke of sicknesses before they appeared. And slowly the whispers began to change. The admiration in their eyes turned into suspicion. Some villagers crossed themselves when she walked by, as if her very presence was a danger. Mothers pulled their children close, not sure whether Claire's touch could heal or curse. And when men gathered in taverns at night, her name often slipped into their talk. They asked themselves how a woman like her could know so much. Some said she had studied with healers in faraway lands. Others said the truth was far darker, that she had bargained with powers that no human should. It was not long before suspicion reached the ears of those in power. The local priest began to watch her closely, his sermons growing sharper with warnings about unnatural knowledge and the dangers of pride. He did not name her, but every word carried a weight that turned more heads toward Claire. Jamie stood by her, shielding her with his loyalty. But even he could feel the rising tide of mistrust. He had seen women accused of witchcraft before, and he knew what the crowd could do when fear took hold of their hearts. Claire herself felt the danger creeping closer. Each time she treated someone, she wondered if her kindness would be remembered as a blessing or twisted into a crime. When she cured a boy of poisoning with knowledge only she could have, his mother wept with gratitude. But his uncle muttered that no ordinary woman could do such a thing without help from the devil. Claire realized that every life she saved carried a shadow, a debt that suspicion would one day demand to be paid. And yet, her heart refused to stop. To walk away from the sick, to turn her back on the injured, would have been easier. But Claire could never do that. She carried her knowledge like a burden she could not lay down, even when it drew eyes filled with fear. She knew too well what was coming, and that made her dangerous, for in a world ruled by superstition and silence, Claire's truth shone too brightly. And sometimes, when the light burns too bright, people will do anything to put it out. It happened on a day that began like any other. The air was heavy, the village restless, and a storm gathered on the horizon. A man had been thrown from his horse, his body broken and his breath shallow. The crowd stood helpless, murmuring prayers, already preparing for his death. But Claire stepped forward. Her hands did not tremble. She knew exactly what to do. With calm certainty, she pressed her fingers against his ribs, listening to the sound of lungs struggling to fill. She called for clean cloth, hot water, herbs no one else had ever thought to mix. To the crowd, it looked like madness. To Claire, it was knowledge she could not ignore. She worked quickly, her movements too precise, too confident. And when the man's breath steadied, when the color returned to his face, the crowd gasped as though they had witnessed a resurrection. But instead of relief, the air filled with something colder. Eyes darted to Claire, not with gratitude, but with suspicion. How could she do what no other healer could? How did she know where to press, what to cut, what to bind? The silence grew heavy, and in that silence danger was born. The whispers that once lived in corners now spoke aloud. One woman muttered the word witch. Another crossed herself and pulled her child away. The priest, who had been watching from the edge, did not hide his frown. He asked questions in front of everyone. Questions meant to expose her. How did she know these secrets? Who taught her? Where did such knowledge come from? Claire's answers, calm and measured, only made the doubt spread faster. Jamie's hand found hers, firm and protective, but she could feel the storm in the crowd. This was the moment when the thin line she had walked finally broke. She had done too much, revealed too much, saved a man in a way no one else could have, and now they no longer saw her as one of them. They saw her as something other. For the first time, Claire felt the full weight of the danger pressing down on her. This was not just about healing. This was about survival, and she understood that one more step, one more mistake could turn whispers into accusations, and accusations into a trial that no one escaped. The turning point had come, and there was no going back. That night, Claire sat by the fire, the crackling flames throwing shadows across the walls. The rescued man slept peacefully in the next room, his family whispering prayers of thanks. But outside, the village told a different story. Some called it a miracle, others called it unnatural. And Claire, caught in the middle, felt the weight of every whisper pressing down on her chest. She knew what the future held for women who stood out, women who dared to be different. She had seen the fear in their eyes, and she had heard the word witch carried on the wind. It was not a word spoken lightly. It was a sentence. And yet, how could she stop herself? She had the knowledge to save lives, knowledge no one else in this century could understand. To stay silent would mean watching people die when she could have saved them. To act meant placing herself and Jamie in the crosshairs of suspicion. Claire's hands trembled as she thought about it. She had lived in two worlds, one where her skills made her respected and another where those same skills could cost her everything. The choice tore at her heart. Was she meant to protect herself? Or was she meant to use what she had been given no matter the cost? Jamie tried to soothe her, his words steady but his eyes heavy with worry. He told her she had to be careful, that not every life could be saved, that sometimes letting fate run its course was safer than fighting it. But Claire could not accept that. She had seen too much, lost too much to ever stand aside. She remembered the wars, the blood, the cries of the dying she had once treated in her own time. She could not go back to pretending ignorance, and so the battle raged within her. silence or truth, safety or compassion. Each choice carried a cost. Each decision drew her closer to danger. Claire knew there would come a moment when she would have to choose not only for herself, but for everyone she loved. As the fire burned low, she stared into the flames and whispered a question only she could ask. How much of the future must I hide to survive the past? It was a question without an answer. But Claire knew one thing. Whatever choice she made, it would change everything.